Beneath the burning southern sky, the air trembled with heat and sorrow. The fields swayed with the slow rhythm of chains. On a land carved by greed and watered with sweat, a cry would rise that would never be forgotten. They said the soil here could taste the blood of the broken. They said the earth could feel when something unnatural was born. And on a night when thunder grumbled like a distant drum, a woman labored in a wooden shack, her breath thin, her hands clenched around a piece of torn cloth. Her name was Ruth. She was young, but her eyes had already turned the color of resignation. The others whispered that she carried a curse, for her belly had grown large, larger than any they had seen. Some said she had been touched by a man, others said by something older, darker, carried through bloodlines that memory itself feared to keep. When the child came, the air seemed to stop. No midwife spoke. No prayer dared cross a lip. The storm outside fell silent for a heartbeat, as if creation hesitated, and then she cried. A sound not like a child's cry, but like a horn of battle echoing from across the ages. The baby was enormous, arms thick, fingers long, eyes the color of storm water. The others drew back. "Lord help us," one whispered. "That one's touched by giants." Ruth looked down at her child, trembling, half in awe, half in terror. She pressed the baby to her chest and whispered one word, heavy with prophecy. "Mara." Bitterness. Moments later, Ruth's breath slowed. Her body, drained of all that fire, went still. The child lived, and the mother slipped into legend. The overseer found the newborn the next morning. He looked upon her with disgust and curiosity. "Big one," he muttered. "Could fetch a price one day." They took the child to the quarters. Even among the enslaved, Mara was different. As she grew, her size frightened the others. At 5, she was taller than boys twice her age. By 10, she could lift what grown men could not. Children whispered tales when they saw her shadow stretch long against the dusk. They said she was born of sin. Some said she was born of Goliath himself, the giant felled by David in the old Bible tales. And though no one spoke it aloud, even the masters seemed uneasy when she passed. She did not understand why the world looked at her with such fear. She only knew that her hands were large, her voice deep, her steps too heavy for the fragile boards of the slave quarters. At night, she would stare at the stars through the cracks in the wood. Somewhere inside her she felt a pulse, something older than her heart. Something that told her she was meant for more than bowing and bleeding. Years passed. The plantation grew crueler, the lash hung heavier, but Mara grew stronger, quieter, watching, learning. Her strength became the master's amusement. They'd call her the big girl, laugh when she carried barrels no man could lift. But behind those laughs was a tremor, because deep down they knew, no chain lasts forever. When she looked at her reflection in the water barrel, she saw the faint shape of her mother's eyes. Behind them, another face, a shadowy echo of a man long dead, wearing a crown of iron, standing over a valley of bones. She did not yet know his name. But he was waiting. In the land of masters and slaves, something ancient had awakened, a child of bitterness, a daughter of Goliath, and as the years turned, the chains around her grew tighter, heavier, until the day her master would decide to make her his favorite pet. Under the merciless glare of the sun, Mara learned silence. The years had carved her into something unbending, her skin marked by the labor of fields and the whip of obedience. She had grown into her size now, taller than any man on the plantation, broader than the horses she yoked. Her shadow fell long over the cotton rows, and even the wind seemed to hesitate when it passed her. The others no longer looked her in the eye. They bowed their heads when she walked by, whispering prayers under their breath. She was no longer just Mara. She was something else, something people feared to name. One afternoon, the master's carriage rolled through the gates. Harlan descended, a man dressed in arrogance and cruelty, his boots polished with the sweat of others. He was new to the land, inheriting it after his father's death. But his eyes, sharp, cold, curious, lingered on Mara the moment he saw her. "Bring her to the house," he said. That night the great doors opened for her. The smell of wine and wax filled the air, and she was led across the polished floor like an animal being shown for trade. Harlan circled her slowly, the way a hunter studies a beast before deciding how to break it. "She's magnificent," he said, smiling faintly. "Stronger than any man I've seen." He stepped closer. "Do you speak, girl?" She lowered her eyes. "Only when I'm told, sir." He laughed softly. "Then you'll learn to speak when I wish to hear it." And so, Mara became his spectacle. He kept her close, fed her better than the others, clothed her in garments that didn't quite fit, like a child dressing a doll too large for its clothes. When guests came, he would call her forth, show her off, make her lift heavy barrels or bend iron tools with her hands. They would gasp and murmur as though watching a circus act. "See what God has wrought," Harlan would say. "Proof that even beasts can be made to serve." Mara never replied. She simply bowed and obeyed. Her silence became her armor, but within her chest, something ancient stirred. Each laugh, each command, each humiliation fed it. A quiet flame, small but unyielding. At night, she slept on the floor of the hall outside Harlan's room. Sometimes she'd hear him talking in his sleep, drunk on wine and delusion. "My giant girl," he'd murmur. "My weapon." She would stare at the ceiling beams and think, a weapon still knows how to strike. One evening, when no one watched, she went to the blacksmith shed. Her wrists were raw from the heavy shackles she wore when she worked. She placed one on the anvil, lifted the hammer, and with a single blow cracked it open. The sound was sharp, cold, final. For a heartbeat, she just stared at it. Then she placed the iron cuff back around her wrist, hiding the break beneath her sleeve. She smiled faintly to herself, the first smile in years, not of joy, of knowledge. The next day, Harlan ordered her to carry a wagon axle across the yard. It weighed as much as 2 men. She lifted it with one arm, the metal groaning in her grip. The workers stopped to watch. For the first time, she saw something in their eyes besides fear, something closer to awe. Harlan noticed too. His smile faltered. Power, he realized, was beautiful until it began to look back at you. That night, he struck her. No reason, no word, just a reminder. "You belong to me," he said through his teeth. She didn't cry. She didn't even move. When he left, she sat on the floor, touching the bruise on her face like one might touch an old scar. And in that silence, she made a promise to herself. No man would ever own her soul. No chain would ever last forever. From outside, a voice called softly. It was Isaiah, a young man with eyes that still held light. He handed her a small scrap of paper, torn and faded. "Found this in the trash by the preacher's room," he whispered. She unfolded it carefully. The words were rough, smudged, but one line stood clear. "And there was war in the valley, and the giant fell." Isaiah smiled. "You ever read before?" She shook her head. "Then I'll teach you," he said, and just like that, a spark of forbidden fire was lit, the kind of fire that could burn a world built on chains, the kind that could turn a slave into a storm, the kind that could awaken the daughter of a giant, the kind that would not stop until the world trembled. Again, night became their teacher. The field slept, the dogs chained, the moon hung low as if listening. In the quiet corners of the barn, Isaiah would whisper letters to her, tracing them into the dirt with a broken stick. "Oh," he'd say softly. "Then be." She'd repeat them, her voice a low rumble, careful not to wake the overseers. At first, the words felt foreign on her tongue, strange and sacred. But then they began to shape themselves into something more, a way to think, to name, to dream. Isaiah showed her verses from torn pages, bits of scripture thrown away by the preacher after Sunday sermons. Most were half destroyed, but one story remained almost whole, the story of David and Goliath. He read the words slowly, reverently. "And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone." His voice trembled as he spoke, though he didn't understand why. When he looked up, Mara's face was lost in shadow, her eyes distant, fixed somewhere beyond the walls. "Do you know that name?" she asked, her tone low. "Goliath?" he said. "Everyone does." "The giant who fell." She said nothing for a long moment, just breathed. Then, barely a whisper, "Maybe he didn't fall. Maybe he waited." Isaiah frowned. "Waited for what?" She turned her gaze on him. "For me," He laughed softly, thinking she was joking. But there was something in her eyes, an old light, something untamed, that silenced him. Days became weeks. The lessons continued. She read more of the story, learned the words by heart. Each syllable crawled under her skin, each phrase etched itself into her bones. The mighty shall fall. The weak shall rise. The Lord shall make strong the broken. At night, she would repeat them in her head until they became prayers or curses. Harlan noticed the change. He saw the way she moved differently now, less like a beast, more like something aware of its own power. Her eyes no longer stayed on the ground. Her silence carried a weight that unsettled him. He called her to the parlor one evening, a room lit by candles that made the walls flicker like they were breathing. "You've been spending time with the others," he said, circling her like a vulture. "That boy, Isaiah, you think I don't see?" Mara stood still, eyes down. "We work the same fields," she said carefully. He stopped in front of her. "Don't lie to me." His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You forget who owns your breath." She didn't flinch. She didn't speak, but for the first time he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. A calm, terrible stillness, the kind of quiet that lives just before thunder strikes. That night Isaiah was taken. The overseers dragged him to the yard, accusing him of plotting escape. They beat him in front of everyone, their laughter carrying under the stars. Mara watched from the line of workers, her fists clenched so tight the skin tore beneath her nails. But she didn't move. Not yet. Later she found one of his torn pages in the dirt, half stained with blood. The words were barely readable, but one line still shone clear beneath the moonlight. "The stone the builders rejected shall become the cornerstone." She folded it carefully, tucked it into her dress, and pressed it against her heart. From that night onward, she stopped sleeping. She worked silently through the day, but her mind was elsewhere, building, sharpening, waiting. She began to notice things others didn't. How the overseer's keys hung loose from his belt. How the guards' rifles leaned unattended near the porch. How the storm clouds gathered earlier with every passing evening. And then, one night, lightning split the sky open. The rain came hard and heavy, drumming against the roofs like a call to arms. In her heart, something answered. She knelt in the mud, lifted her face to the storm and whispered, "If my blood comes from giants, let it remember what it was." The wind howled as if it heard her. The trees bent. The ground trembled. When she rose, her eyes glowed with the faint reflection of lightning. Her body seemed to hold the storm itself. The forbidden fire had been lit. Not the fire of rebellion alone, but of revelation. She had read the story of David and Goliath, but now she understood its other side. The world remembered the boy who killed the giant, but it had forgotten the daughter who lived on to carry his wrath, and soon they would remember her. Morning began with a sky the color of bruised iron. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Something in the soil felt restless, as if the earth knew what was about to happen. The overseer's horn sounded across the fields, short, sharp, cruel. The workers gathered in silence. Mara stood among them, her shoulders square, her face unreadable. In the yard, a post had been raised. Ropes hung from it like serpents waiting to strike. They had caught another man in the night. Someone who had run. The rumor moved like smoke through the crowd. It was Isaiah. Harlan stood on the porch, dressed in white, sipping from a glass of wine. His voice carried easily across the yard. "A lesson must be taught," he said, calm as a sermon. "Defiance cannot grow in this soil." Two guards dragged Isaiah forward. His shirt was torn, his back already streaked with dirt. His eyes found Mara's through the crowd, steady, brave, forgiving. He did not beg. He only shook his head slightly as if telling her, "Don't move." Not yet. The first crack of the whip cut through the morning like lightning. The sound hung in the air, long after the strike. The second followed. Then a third. The sky darkened with every sound. Mara's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing louder than the lash. Her hands trembled. The world around her blurred, the faces, the shouting, the wind stirring the dust. All she could see was Isaiah, and the words he had given her now drowned in the noise. By the time it ended, the rain had started. Slow drops at first, then heavy, as if the heavens themselves could no longer watch. Harlan raised his voice above the storm. "Let this be a warning," he said. "No slave escapes my hand. The workers were dismissed." The crowd dissolved into the rain. Mara did not move. She stood where she was until the yard emptied, until the overseer's boots vanished back into the house. Then she walked forward and knelt where Isaiah had fallen. The rain washed the dirt away from the ground, revealing the faint shape of letters scratched in the mud, unfinished, but clear enough. A single word, "Rise." She pressed her palm against it. The water mixed with her tears, and for a moment she couldn't tell the difference. That night, the storm returned with fury. Thunder rolled across the hills, a sound too deep to be of the sky alone. In her cabin, Mara sat by the window, watching lightning carve the darkness. Every flash lit her face in silver. She whispered the word again. "Rise." The wind answered through the cracks in the wood. It howled around her like voices of the dead. Her breath grew heavy. She closed her eyes and saw visions in the flashes behind her eyelids, shapes of towering figures, warriors standing in a great valley. A giant fell, but another stood in his place. A woman with eyes like fire, her arms red with the dust of battle. She saw him then, the one from her dreams. Goliath, no longer slain, but alive in shadow watching her. His voice was low, echoing from somewhere beneath the earth. "They called me monster because I refused to kneel, and they will call you the same." She opened her eyes. The room shook as thunder struck nearby. The roof beams groaned. A jar fell and shattered at her feet. "Then I will be their monster," she whispered. Her pulse slowed, steady and certain. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows. From that night onward, every sound of thunder felt like a promise, every flash of lightning like a calling. The overseer said the weather had turned wild, that the storms came too often now. The fields drowned, the crops rotted, the sky itself seemed to have turned against them. But Mara knew better. It wasn't the sky that was angry. It was the blood that ran through her, and it would not be silent much longer. Dawn came grey and heavy, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and ash. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the trees. Nothing moved except the crows circling above the fields, their calls sharp and uneasy. Mara stood at the edge of the quarters, her bare feet sinking into the mud. The rain had washed the world clean, but it could not wash the fire from her blood. Something inside her had shifted, quietly, terribly. The others sensed it. When she walked by, their voices fell to whispers. The overseers watched her more closely, though none would meet her eyes. In the mirror of the rain barrel, she saw herself reflected, a face she almost didn't recognize. The features were her mother's, but there was something new behind them. A calm she had never known, a power that frightened even her. When she lifted her hands, she saw the strength in them, the same hands that had picked cotton, carried timber, tended wounds. They trembled now, not with fear, but with restraint. She whispered, "These are not chains. These are instruments." The fields stretched out before her, endless rows of damp green. Each stalk bowed under the weight of water, like a congregation waiting for its preacher. The wind moved through them in long, mournful sighs. She thought of Isaiah's word scratched in the mud. "Rise," and she knew she already was. Days passed, though the hours blurred into one another. She worked as before, spoke little, kept her head down, but something watched her from inside. At night, when sleep refused her, she saw him again, the shadow of a man taller than the trees, his eyes gleaming like iron. Goliath. He didn't speak at first. He only stood there, massive and solemn, his presence both terrible and tender. Then when she finally dared to ask, "Why me?" his voice came like a drumbeat from the deep earth. "Because you remember." She woke with her heart pounding, sweat slick on her skin. The cabin was still, the night thick around her. She listened to the wind, the whisper of leaves, the distant rumble of thunder returning over the hills. "They fear you," the wind seemed to say. "They always have." Mara began to test herself. When she carried water buckets, she filled them to the brim. When she hoisted timber, she used one arm instead of two. The strain no longer burned, it sang. The overseer noticed one morning when she lifted a cart that two men could barely move. "Show off," he muttered, but his voice quavered. He told her to stop, yet couldn't look away. The whip in his hand hung loose. She obeyed, but her eyes met his for the first time. The moment hung in the air, heavy and electric. Something wordless passed between them. His fear, her quiet promise. Then she turned back to work. That night, she dreamed of a valley filled with light and dust. Warriors clashed below, their cries echoing across time. She stood among them, no longer bound, no longer human. Her arms shone like bronze. The voice of her ancestor rose again. "They will call you monster, but monsters are only those who refuse to die quietly." When she awoke, dawn was breaking. The world outside shimmered in gold and grey. She stepped outside, barefoot, and let the light touch her skin. For the first time she felt it didn't burn, it crowned. She walked toward the fields. The earth beneath her seemed to hum with each step. The others watched from a distance, uncertain if they should follow or flee. One of the women whispered, "The giant's child has awakened." Mara said nothing. She simply stood tall among the rows, the rising sun behind her, her shadow stretching far and long across the land that had tried to bury her. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The wind brushed her face like a blessing. For the first time in her life, she did not bow her head. The storm had not broken her. It had revealed her, and soon everyone would see what the storm had left behind. The summer sun burned red that day, bleeding across the sky like an omen. The house was alive with noise, music, laughter, the clinking of glass. Harlan had invited guests from the neighboring estates. They came dressed in linen and arrogance, their carriages gliding up the road as though drawn by pride itself. Mara moved through the hall with a silver tray balanced on one hand. She had been ordered to serve. The guests stared as she passed, some with fascination, others with quiet revulsion. "The master's giant girl," they whispered. "A wonder. A beast." Harlan stood near the hearth, smiling, wine spilling from his glass. "Isn't she magnificent?" he said. "Strong as a bull, gentle as a lamb, when properly kept." The laughter that followed was thin and nervous. Mara kept her eyes on the floor, but she heard every word. Each laugh fell like a spark onto dry kindling. As the night deepened, the room grew louder, the music faster. The air thickened with smoke and heat. She moved like a shadow among them, her mind elsewhere, on Isaiah's empty voice, on the word etched in mud, on the storm that had not left her since that night. When she set the last glass down, Harlan turned toward her. His face was flushed, his smile too wide. "Come," he said, motioning her forward. "Show them how strong you are." She hesitated. "Sir, the guests," he cut her off. "Lift the table." The room went still. She placed her hands beneath the great oak table and raised it easily, as if it weighed nothing. Gasps rippled through the hall. Wine sloshed, candles flickered. When she set it down again, the floorboard shuddered. "See?" Harlan said, laughing, eyes bright with wine. "Even a creature born of sin can serve a purpose." Something inside her cracked, though nothing showed on her face. He reached out suddenly, gripping her wrist. The room quieted. "You forget your place sometimes," he said softly, his breath thick with drink. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if you turned that strength against me?" She looked at him then, truly looked. For the first time he saw what lived behind her eyes. A calm deeper than fear, older than rage. The laughter died on his lips. Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance. Mara slowly removed her wrist from his grasp. "No, sir," she said. "I never wonder." The candles wavered as if the air itself had changed. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered a prayer. Then, without warning, the wind surged through the open doors. The flames bent sideways, shadows leaping across the walls. The music stopped. Mara turned and walked out of the room, her steps echoing against the marble. No one spoke. No one followed. The silence she left behind was heavier than any chain. When the storm broke over the house, the lights went out. Thunder shook the walls. The guests fled into the rain, shouting her name like a curse. By morning, the mansion was empty. The master's chair lay toppled. The wine spilled dark across the floorboards. The wind carried the smell of smoke from the fields beyond. No one could say what had happened. only that nothing was ever the same again. Those who survived swore they'd seen her walking into the dawn, barefoot, her dress torn, her face turned toward the horizon. The storm followed her for miles, rolling low and endless, as if it were part of her. From that day forward, no one spoke the name Harlan without a shiver. And the slaves who had once whispered about the giant girl began to speak of something else. They called her Deliverance. And in the places where the rain had not yet dried, a single word could be found scrawled in the mud, as if written by the storm itself. Rise. The morning rose on a world unrecognizable. Smoke drifted over the horizon like a second dawn, gray and trembling. The mansion stood hollow, its white pillars streaked with soot, its windows black with night's residue. No music, no laughter now, only the whisper of ash falling like snow. The fields were quiet, eerily so. Rows of cotton bent under the weight of dew, untouched. The overseer's whip hung from a post, abandoned. From the far edge of the property came movement, a slow ripple, like the stirring of something long dormant. Shapes emerged from the fog, men and women, barefoot, unchained. They walked without speaking, drawn by the smoke, by the silence. Some carried children, others carried nothing but the clothes on their backs. All carried one name on their lips, though none dared say it aloud. Mara. No one had seen her since the night the storm took the house. Some swore they'd watched her vanish into the rain. Others said the wind had lifted her whole and carried her north. But every heart that beat that morning carried the same pulse, a thrum of freedom, wild and impossible. They reached the fields together, and there she was, standing in the middle of the rows, tall and still as a monument. The sunlight cut around her figure, making her seem carved from fire and shadow both. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, her hands streaked with earth, but her eyes were steady, burning with something holy. When they saw her, some fell to their knees. Others simply stared, afraid to breathe. She said nothing for a long while. The only sound was the rustling of the crops, the soft cry of morning birds. Then, in a voice that carried through the smoke and silence alike, she said, "No more." It was not a shout. It did not need to be. The words moved through them like a wind through tall grass. No more. The voices began to echo one by one until it became a single trembling chorus. Mara turned to face the house. Flames still licked at its roof. The heat shimmered around her like a crown. She raised her hand, not in fury but in farewell. Behind her, someone struck a match. Then another. Soon the dry fields began to glow. The fire caught easily, greedily, running along the rows as if it had been waiting for this day. The sky grew darker, filled with smoke and light. The fire did not destroy, it cleansed. It turned years of pain into flame, years of silence into thunder. The enslaved did not flee. They watched the world that had owned them crumble to ash, and in that ruin they found breath. Children clung to their mothers, their faces lit orange by the burning fields. Old men wept openly, their hands raised toward heaven. Women sang low ancient songs, not of mourning, but of remembrance, and Mara stood among them unmoving, as if made of the same force that fed the blaze. When the last wall of the mansion collapsed, the sound was not one of ending but of release. Night fell before the fire died. The people gathered by the river, silent, tired, alive. The water glowed faintly, carrying the reflection of the flames. A young boy approached Mara and asked, "Where will we go?" She looked toward the north, the vast unknown stretching beyond the hills. "Where the sun rises free," she said. "That's where we begin." Some followed her that night. Others scattered, seeking safety, new names, new lives. But all would remember the sight. The towering woman walking ahead of the dawn, her shoulders squared, her steps slow and steady, her shadow long across the fields that had once been their prison. By morning, word had already spread. From one plantation to the next, from the rivers to the roads, whispers carried her story like wildfire. The giant woman who burned her master's world to the ground. No one agreed on the details. Some said she was a spirit of vengeance. Others said she was Goliath's blood reborn, sent by God to deliver the broken. But everyone, everywhere, spoke her name, Mara, And in the glow of that fire, the myth of her began. Not as a monster, not as a murderer, but as something greater, a storm given form. A mother to freedom, and when the last embers cooled, when the fields turned to black earth again, the wind whispered through the ashes as if repeating her word, soft but eternal, rise. They said the sky never cleared after that night. For weeks, the air hung thick with the smell of smoke and rain. The ashes of Harlan's fields traveled far, carried by the wind until they fell like black snow on neighboring towns. People woke to find their porches dusted in soot, their wells stained grey, and they whispered, "The firewoman has passed." Stories spread faster than riders. Some swore she'd grown taller with every mile she walked, her shadow stretching over the rivers and swamps. Others claimed she vanished by day and walked only beneath the moon. To some she was the devil's child, to others the hand of justice itself. The white men of the county gathered their militias. They rode out in hunting parties, dogs and torches in hand. They spoke of capturing a beast, but their eyes betrayed fear. Each night they returned empty-handed, because Mara was not hiding. She was watching. Deep in the wetlands she moved like a spirit among the cypress trees. The mud swallowed her steps. The mist wrapped her in silence. She lived on river water and wild roots. The wounds on her hands had closed, but their memory remained, tight lines of history written in skin. One night, she came upon a group of runaways shivering beneath an overturned wagon. Their faces lifted when they saw her, eyes wide, frightened. She said nothing, only knelt to help them build a fire. The children stared at her enormous hands as she stacked the wood. The smallest girl whispered, "Are you her, the one who burned the chains?" Mara looked into the flames before answering. "I am no one," she said softly, "but I remember her." They slept safely that night, and when they woke she was gone. In her place a single mark pressed into the mud, an open hand the size of a man's chest. Days became weeks. The hunt went on. The stories grew. A bounty poster appeared in nearby towns. Wanted, giant Negro woman, 6'8", dangerous, known as daughter of Goliath. For every poster nailed to a wall, someone quietly tore one down. A preacher in Georgia told his flock, if the Lord could send plagues to Pharaoh, maybe he sent this woman to remind us our sins still burn. The congregation murmured, torn between awe and terror. Further north, abolitionist papers began printing her story in secret columns. A giant enslaved woman destroys her master's estate and vanishes into legend. To the enslaved, she became a vision of possibility. To the hunters, she was a nightmare that refused to die. One evening, as a militia camped near the river, their captain sat cleaning his rifle. He heard something move behind him, just the slow shifting of branches. He turned, heart-pounding, but saw only mist. Then came a voice, low and calm. "Tell them I am not what they made me." The sound seemed to come from the trees themselves. By dawn, the camp was empty. The men had fled, leaving their weapons behind. As months passed, the world seemed to reshape itself around her legend. Towns burned in her name. Songs were sung quietly in the dark. One went, "She walks the night with thunder's tread, her eyes like dawn, her heart long dead." She broke the yoke, she loosed the chain. The giant's child walks free again. Some said she had crossed the river into freedom. Others claimed she still walked the southern woods, guarding those who ran. But in truth, Mara herself no longer knew what she was. The woman who had once been a slave had become something larger, something both feared and needed. She had no home, no master, no name that fit anymore. When she looked at her reflection in the water, she saw not the girl born in chains, nor the monster they had imagined, but a face shaped by both grief and grace. She spoke to that reflection quietly. They wanted a beast. I will give them a memory. And somewhere, far behind her, the sound of pursuit faded into the wind. She walked on, into the deeper woods, where the moonlight touched the trees like silver. The hunt would continue. Men would always hunt what they feared, but she was no longer prey. Now she was myth-walking, and myths cannot be caught. Years rolled forward like fog over the hills. The world changed its face as it always does, but her name lingered, soft as rumor, sharp as scripture. Some said she was captured and hanged by a river oak, her shadow stretching long across the water before the sun rose. Others claimed she crossed into the north, working as a midwife under a false name, her great hands gentler now, healing instead of breaking. In one version, she vanished into the swamp and never returned. In another, she rose with the dawn and simply kept walking until she stepped beyond this world entirely. The truth, whatever it was, became almost irrelevant. Because truth has limits. Legends do not. Children born on new soil grew up hearing of her. They whispered her name when the nights were long, when the overseer's voice carried too close, when the whip cracked in the distance. Mara. The name itself became a shield. Old women told the story by firelight, their eyes gleaming as they spoke of the giant woman who burned the fields and freed the chained. They described her taller each year, stronger, faster, until she towered over the sky itself. The men who had once hunted her aged into silence. When their grandchildren asked what had happened to the giant woman, their answers trembled between pride and guilt. She wasn't real, they said too quickly. Just talk. But even as they denied her, they built fences higher and slept with lamps burning. There were others, writers, poets, wanderers, who came looking for traces. They found nothing but ashes, bones of houses, and a single handprint scorched into stone. They argued whether it was carved or branded by something that once burned hotter than any flame. Years turned into decades. The war came and went. The land changed flags, but the soil remembered. The fields where she had stood bloomed differently. Cotton refused to grow there. Locals called it the cursed ground. Yet the curse felt more like a warning than a wound. In secret, the newly freed began telling a different version, one not about fear, but about promise. In their telling, Mara did not die at all. She became something eternal, walking unseen beside every soul who ran toward freedom. In one account, from an escaped man named Samuel Crow, written in a trembling hand, he described being pursued by hounds in a rainstorm. "The dog stopped at the edge of the swamp," he wrote, "and then I saw her shadow rise in the lightning, tall as the trees. I never saw her face, but I heard her say, 'Run,' and I did. I ran until the sky turned blue again." The scholars dismissed it as fancy. But the people, the ones who still bore the marks of the old world, believed. They sang to her in field songs and church hymns disguised with other names. She became a parable of endurance, a warning to the proud, a comfort to the broken. In one dusty book decades later, a historian wrote, "The story of Goliath's daughter may have originated as a metaphor for rebellion, later mythologized into the figure of a woman. There is no evidence such a person existed, but legends are not evidence. They are echoes, and echoes can outlive the voice that made them." On quiet nights, travelers along the river still claim to hear footsteps in the reeds, heavy, rhythmic, patient. Some say the sound is just the water shifting. Others swear they feel the ground tremble faintly beneath their feet, like a heartbeat in the soil. The story became a mirror. In it, everyone saw what they needed. To the fearful, she was wrath. To the hopeful, deliverance. To the lost, a direction. They told it differently each time, until truth and invention wove together so tightly that no one could separate them anymore. And perhaps that was always the point. Mara had once said, "They wanted a beast. I will give them a memory." Now that memory lived everywhere, in songs, in sermons, in silence itself, and whether she was woman, giant, or spirit, her story refused to die. Because what is a legend, if not a way for the living to remember their own strength? Somewhere, far away, the wind still carried her name. It came softly through the trees, brushing against windows, stirring candle flames. And when it passed, people stood a little taller, as if the air itself had whispered a reminder. Chains break. Fire cleanses, giants rise. The land sleeps now. The river that once ran black with ash has grown quiet again, its surface smooth as glass beneath the moon. Trees have reclaimed what fire once devoured. Roots twisting through the bones of old walls, blossoms rising from forgotten graves. Where the plantation stood, there is only wind. It moves softly through the tall grass, humming a song older than memory. If you stand there long enough, you can almost hear voices, faint, layered, overlapping like ghosts in the air. They do not cry. They hum, and under that hum, something heavier still, the rhythm of footsteps, slow and distant, fading and returning, as if the earth itself still remembers her weight. A modern road cuts through the land now. Tourists drive by unaware. Some stop to take pictures of the ruins, not knowing what they're looking at. The guidebooks call it the Harlan Estate ruins, mention a tragic fire, and move on. But there is one path they never pave over, a narrow trail that leads to the riverbank, where the soil dips and darkens. The locals call it Goliath's Walk. Children dare each other to follow it at night. Few do. Those who try swear the air changes halfway through, heavier, quieter, as if the world itself is listening. They say if you whisper her name there, the wind will answer, and sometimes it does. It's been more than a century. The world has new masters now, new chains, new kinds of silence. But the story survives, not in books, not in sermons, but in pulse and breath, in the laughter of women who refuse to bow, in the voices of men who stand when told to kneel, in every march, every cry for justice, every step that shakes the ground a little harder. Each one carries the echo of her, because Mara was never just a woman. She was an idea given flesh, a storm that refused to pass. The world called her monster. The world always does when it meets something too strong to cage. But for those who still sing her story, she is not a warning. She is a beginning. Sometimes when the night is long and the air still, you can hear her in the distance, a low rumble, almost like thunder, almost like a drum. It moves closer, fades, returns again, a woman walking, still walking. And in that sound lives everything she ever was. The mother's cry that bore her, the roar that broke her chains, the silence that followed her storm. The last of the old ones who remember her by name say she never left, that she walks the edges of every field where pain once took root, keeping watch over those who came after. They call her by many names now, Deliverer, Storm Mother, the giant's daughter, but among themselves, they call her something simpler, Mother of the Rising. No one knows who first carved her likeness. But somewhere in the woods stands a statue, stone, tall, weathered by time. No inscription, no face, just the shape of a woman standing straight, one hand open to the sky, the other pressed to the ground, as though blessing both heaven and earth. Each spring, someone leaves flowers there. No one admits to it. And each summer, when the air grows heavy and thunder stirs in the distance, people close their doors, but they smile when the first drops fall, because they remember every storm is a resurrection of her, the giant woman who walked through fire and did not burn, the child born of chains who broke the chain itself, the myth who became a mirror. The land may forget her face, but it will never forget her steps. The wind carries them still, steady, eternal, patient. Listen closely. They are coming again, and with them the promise she left behind. They called me monster, but I was never the monster. I was the morning, and in that dawn, she rises once more, taller than grief, older than fear, her shadow stretching across a world still learning how to stand. Her echo moves through us all, whispering, always whispering, "Rise."